Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, so much of the background story we've had throughout this late fall and winter has been the redevelopment of our second in 2 years La Niña. We've talked a lot about it. I just want to show you the latest extent of the ocean temperatures. Now, we remember that the ocean temperature pattern that you see here is really more a symptom where the cause of the upwelling in the colder water has been the behavior of the trade winds. And those trade winds are so important to understand because ultimately they determine the strength of a La Niña. They also determine where the position of the Madden-Julian oscillation will be. They even control what we call the Indian Ocean dipole. All of these things are ultimately a fluctuation in the normal, east to west flowing trade wind pattern. Now, when we look at this particular La Niña as it's fading here through January, we ask a couple of big questions. One, has winter so far played into the typical La Niña pattern? We're going to answer that one in a few moments. And two, how quickly is it going to continue to fade? Now, the best answer for that second question is shown right here. I'm just looking at from the European model, their seasonal forecast, and we can see that appears as though once we get into April and May and June, at that point we'll fully be back into what we would call ENSO neutral territory with respect to the ocean temperatures. I think that the trade winds have already made this adjustment, but I want to show you their rather peculiar behavior right now. So again, we look for about to be below half a degree below average in order to be a La Niña, or above a half a degree above average to be an El Nino. We could be knocking on the door of an El Nino event come midsummer next summer, possibly getting into the fall. All right, so we pose those questions and we see the graphics, and then we start to ask, all right, what should we typically expect during a La Niña winter? Because, we still have a lot of this winter to go. Main features, big blocking high typically sits here somewhere south of Alaska. And the jet stream kind of runs over that. Tend to be wetter in the Pacific Northwest, but drier from California into Texas and sometimes along the Gulf Coast. Now, a lot of times these systems will start to make the turn right here, and you get on the right side of the trough, and you get some wetter conditions in this region. So just looking at what a typical La Niña would give you, and again, this comes from NOAA. All right, let's just go take a look at what we've seen. Well, the jet stream level pattern, as denoted here by the 500 millibar height pattern, certainly had a lot of ridging here. But some of that cooler water that's been over in parts of the North Pacific and the Gulf of Alaska has helped pull our troughs back of it with it. But the flow has certainly done what we would expect when there is a La Niña overall. Now we're stitching together November, December, and most of January when we make this plot. Another interesting thing about this is take a look down here in the southern hemisphere. The very low heights just north of Antarctica and the higher than average heights here is why we've had such very strong jet stream level winds in this direction in the southern hemisphere. And that's a big part of how we ended up developing that drought in Argentina, because the jet stream was so far to the south and so strong it wasn't sending troughs across Argentina. We'll cover more of that in our South American video I'll release in a few minutes here. But here's another component of it that's been problematic. Now these maps, when you first get a good look at them, they can be a bit confusing. But let me just show what you're looking at here. From November through December and most of the way through January, we're looking at jet stream level winds, and we're looking at anomalies or differences from normal. What I'm looking for here is who's been robbed of the good jet stream level wind. So the flows come around that ridge and at times dipped into the northwest, much of California. That was December. But then after that, we've had flow that's come around like this. Now, we've talked about this. Flow out of the northwest across the United States in the wintertime brings a lot of convergence and drier weather. What you see that's most important, especially for the West Coast, is that the anomalous wind coming off the coast has gone this way. Typically in El Nino years, that arrow flips around. We get tons of moisture that piles up into the western part of the United States. And one of the things I'll be addressing here in the next couple of videos is what are the chances of this flipping around and switching for the month of March or even April, to give the West Coast what we often call a miracle March or an amazing April. So we missed that subtropical component of the jet stream. And this is kind of what it's gotten us. Let me shrink that up so you can see the whole map. When I even just look back over the last month here, we continue to kind of see drier conditions that have hit much of the southern plains, despite some good snow that just came in here earlier this week. In fact, certainly an overachiever on snow there. But if the models would suggest that, or the historical analysis would suggest that from California through the desert southwest into the southern plains would be dry, we've seen that in this month due to that lack of a subtropical jet. What's occurred, though, is we've had better snows coming in on the jet stream flow like this, and they've made the turn, And right where we would expect it to be above average on precipitation, it has been. So you look at that, we kind of come back to this graphic, whoops, this one right here, and say, all right, I'm starting to see that this has been a very La Niña-like winter. Now, as of late, we did get a little bit of snow that came in through here, right? This was just looking at the last 3 days. I take that back. Not a little bit of snow. This was a major band that set up in here, delivering much more than predicted. We were looking for 3 to 7 inches in there. We had some places that were way up here, well above 6 inches, approaching a foot or more. Now, remember, when we look at how much liquid is in that, when it melts to hit this drought-parched area in the plains, there's about a half inch of liquid, maybe a little bit more than that in this. So that's going to help this region out, but it's not a cure-all for that drought that's there. And then we look at that temperature pattern. Boy, that's very characteristic of La Niña. Over the last 30 days, we've had several cold air intrusions that have come out of the Canadian prairie. They've made it all the way to the Gulf Coast, but at the same time, we've had several warm-ups. So this is kind of La Niña to the T. So thinking about that, knowing that the La Niña is fading, what can we learn and how is it going to relate to the MJO? Let's do that as we build out this long-range forecast today. First, got a new drought monitor today, and we still have better than 70% of the country covered in some form of drought. But I always like to show you those change maps, right? So we'll look at how much it's changed just in the last week, pockets throughout the southern and central plains, and over here in west central Illinois. I think we're going to see some correction on this very soon. But in the next couple of weeks, we're going to forecast here. While I do anticipate better precipitation in through this area, back into the southern plains and the high plains of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, this isn't something that I'm seeing largely getting corrected anytime soon. And again, one of my big concerns is, should this drought area expand over the coming months into Iowa or Nebraska or even more into Missouri or Arkansas, that drought area looks something like this once we get into spring. This is just going to be something I'll be worrying about that the jet stream may end up trying to avoid early by sending the much of its momentum farther to the north, and that's a drought signal for much of the central and midwestern part of the United States. Again, it's something I'm watching. There's no guarantee in that, right? We could erase all of this drought if all of a sudden the jet stream, for reasons we just don't see right now, starts coming out of the southwest and targets that area. Now, the MJO is probably the most elusive thing to diagnose right now. You know that throughout much of this winter, I've used it as a primary indicator. And that's because, back in November, it was way out here, high amplitude phase 5, came out high amplitude phase 6, and then getting into December and January, it's been a lot of time at higher amplitude phase 7 and 8. Well, it's collapsed since then. And, when you think about what the influence is early in the season of having the MJ over here, kind of does what we'd expect, right? Put that big ridge somewhere over here, get the flow doing that, and that's very characteristic of a La Niña to favor MJO phase 7. But as I've stated, this La Niña is beginning to fade. And if we look out there using the long-range European ensemble, so this is the short range, the next 15 days, this is the 45-day, we now see that it's possible that the MJO signal is showing up back over here near Australia. Maybe the most likely phase to come out in would be phase 5. Although historically that's not favored, the MJO pattern right now suggests that may occur. Now, how I know that is, again, I'm looking at these trade winds, from today through the 11th of February. And I see still we have some stronger trades back in place here. We saw these way back in November and December as well. And where they kind of run into the westerly sits right here, and that's sitting right on top of like phase 4 and 5. Now, why we care a lot about that is that it could give us this look. Now, if I'm right, and the MJO pops out into phase 5, this would be an excellent signal for returning moisture to places that desperately need it. And this is the reason why. If it pops out into phase 5, the ridge moves back. See it here? The flow comes over it, and we get a little bit of an interesting setup. There oftentimes tends to be cutoff lows over California, so the flow's got to come around like this. And if it does, that returns moisture to California. See this ridge in place here? The flow then has to jump up over that ridge or north of it, which tends to produce a lot of systems that come out of the southern plains on southwest flow, producing quite a bit of precipitation. They track through the Midwest into the eastern Corn Belt and then eventually the Northeast. It's also milder for the south. But if the MJO phase 5, is verified, we also tend to get quite a bit of troughing coming out of like the Chukchi Sea into northern Alaska, Alaska, northern Canada. And that can often give you clipper systems. To be honest, I'd want nothing more than to see phase 5 show up sometime soon. But that's me saying this squiggly mess is actually much more honed in, and the models are going to really show it jumping out into phase 5. Because this is what's actually in the model, you end up getting this as the change in the forecast. You see, I'm going to show you the near term, and we're going to go to the long term. This is what we're going to have by this weekend. There's the big trough produced in the nor'easter, and we're going to watch 1, 2, 3 waves that are going to come together in the Midwest soon. But that's not why we're looking at this. I'll get to that in a second. You see, by Groundhog's Day, right now the model's pretty highly amplified, digging a pretty deep trough into the central United States, and that's going to bring in some really cold air in like the day 5 through 10 time period. But look at what the European model's doing. This is just a 2-week forecast. It's not biting on that MJO phase 5 just yet. See it? I'll take you out to day 10, out to day 11 and 12, 13. Let's go all the way out to day 15. You see this? The models are just so stuck on putting a ridge back somewhere over the west and bringing the trough in through here. And that's a pattern that tends to produce mild conditions in the plains, dry conditions there, dry conditions in California. And systems have to roll through this and try to exit east. That is not my, wishful thinking of a phase 5, position. And the models even beyond that, let's now take a look. This is what they're looking at for the 10th of February through the 10th of March. And they continue to favor higher pressure here and above normal pressure to the north. That's just all indicative of a ridge. What we get out of this is a precipitation pattern that again keeps this area active. But now the models have come in drier for parts of Texas, they've come in drier for parts of the south, and they've even gotten drier for the west coast, including California. So the presence of that ridge that they're carrying into week 2 seems to just last, and the flow comes around like this. Now this is going to be returning moisture to some drier areas in the Midwest, and there's pretty good reason to think that it's going to do that. But it's not the type of setup that I wanted where the ridge was farther back to the west. We get a little cutoff here. Southwest flow bringing moisture back into this area and into California as well as we finish February and get into March. What I'm going to tell you is I still think the more dominant teleconnection in the atmosphere is the MJO. And if it does indeed pop out over Australia and comes out in a higher amplitude, even though the models are not really keying in on that very well, that would be a signal towards some improvement as we go forward into the late February, the rest of February and into March. As it stands, though, that same pattern gives you this kind of temperature outlook. Let's use that one. More mild days here. And if there's cold air, it's kind of leaking through like this. Okay. So we'll have to watch this carefully. I think that right now we're at a high failure point with the models. I'll even make another case for that as we get toward the end of this video. Now in the near term, we still got 2 major systems to deal with. And this is the way the jet stream level winds are behaving right now. This trough is going to quickly move off the coast tomorrow and initiate a low right here off the Carolina coast. I'll show you that in a second. Then we're going to watch 1, 2, 3. Those 3 separate troughs there all come together midweek next week. And they're going to make for a possible situation that comes out of the southern plains, maybe returning some moisture there, in a kind of multi-wave open trough that was going to cut from kind of the mid-south right through parts of the Great Lakes states. And the models at this point are going to be filling in some of these snow holes. So again, I like to show you these maps. This is the current season-to-date snow totals around the country. Again, I only let my map go up to 40 inches, so of course we're much higher in the mountains throughout the west and here in the upper Midwest. But what we're looking for here are some places that still need a lot of this snow. Maybe a better way to digest this map is to look at it in terms of percent of normal. With this big system that's going up into New England, we could really bring up some snow totals here. And then with this system midweek next week that emerges in this area and then races toward the Great Lakes, we could really add some snow to this region as well. Because right now the 10-day outlook is showing both of those systems. The first one taking shape here and running up the coast. We'll show you the snowfall totals in a moment. And now you can see this open wave that's going to show up here and multiple shots at bringing in heavier rains and snow and unfortunately some ice on the back side of it. But because this pattern continues to build more ridging in the west, this is still going to be a concern moving forward. The fact that we've not returned better moisture to the west like we had really hoped to. And if you look throughout the month of January, parts of California into Nevada, Utah and Arizona, very dry. Our Southern Plains drought has expanded. We've also been drier here and a lack of snow in parts of Nebraska through western South Dakota, western North Dakota, and Montana. And this is a region in through here that's really missed out on a lot of this precipitation as well. Same thing for this part of New England. We've corrected some of the drought over here, parts of the Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas, and they're going to see more very soon. Let's go right into the high-res models and get a good look at this. This is the 18Z NAM run today, and as we play this forward, this is going into the overnight hours tonight on Thursday night, but let's get you out to the morning on Friday because that's when a lot of you are going to watch this. A lot of scattered snow that's coming from basically Illinois to Pennsylvania and points in between, just scattered light snow. And what you see here is that finally once we get to about 7 p.m. on Friday, that snow is moving through parts of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, back into the Appalachian Mountains, and the low's taking shape just off the shore. Now the latest high-res NAM, okay, you can see that the back edge of the snow that it produces is very much confined to almost just right along the shore. Some of the other models are a bit more generous with the snow farther inland, but this is what we've got going all the way through Saturday midday. By the way, there's another little weak clipper that comes over on Saturday into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. But we've got to let the longer range models take over from here, so let's just do this together. GFS on the left, European on the right. So we've already seen the first wave, and let's take this out now to Saturday morning. Now, if you take a look here, the subtle differences in the model position are just impacting where that snow is going to be on the backside. It could be from North Carolina at this point all the way up to Massachusetts. As we let this play forward, both models continue to race the system up the coast, but there's a little bit different in the track. The European model back a bit farther west delivers more snow. And that's going to be very impactful along the coast. But that low gets out of there by the time we get to Sunday around 6 a.m. Now you know behind it we've got some snow showers coming in on these little clippers. And as we go into the weekend, there is an upper level trough that cuts into the Pacific Northwest. Good, we need more moisture in that area. But as I told you, we had 3 different shortwaves that were going to be coming together next Tuesday. So the one to the north cuts through, brings in the snow showers from basically Saskatchewan and Alberta straight through to Lake Superior. At the same time this is going on, you can see in both models there's high pressure over here, opening up the Gulf, bringing in the moisture and quite a bit of warmth, and it's going to meet some very cold air on the backside. But this next system comes through in multiple short waves, and they actually right now never close off a low in the models. So that started on Tuesday night and goes through Wednesday night here. And what you can see is the European's a much more open system than the GFS, which is trying to close off and head north quicker. That's a big difference in the models there. But they both produce this system, and it's still sticking around there by Thursday and going into Thursday night and eventually into Friday morning. That system's going to try to pull very quickly into parts of Ontario and Quebec. Now, the GFS is much faster, as it typically is, with the northward advancement of that. But the GFS also brings in a second punch. Now, this is really far out there in the forecast, but watch what the GFS does. When the European clears the coast, the GFS tosses another low right here into this part of Tennessee, northern Alabama, Georgia, into this region. Now, this, of course, is so far out in the model forecast, we can't rely on it. But the fact is, we got a big system coming next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And that system right in there is in both models. It's in the ensembles, but it's a difficult system to resolve because of the weak features that are currently taking shape to make this big feature later, and the fact that we actually don't really see the models closing off a low here. It's a big open trough that produces this. So what do we do with it? Let's first of all take a look at how much snow we're going to get out of the European. So as we play it forward, our first big system runs along the coast. We could see right here along the coast easily some places picking up more than a foot. But if this shifts at all because of the high pressure on the backside to the east, this all misses. The next system cuts, like we talked about, here through the Great Lakes. That's a little clipper. And then this is what the European model has for that next system rolling through. Now, this is the operational run. This is just a single model run, and it pulls through and produces that snow swath. To compare it to the GFS, this is what the GFS does over the same time. Different trajectory. The GFS is quicker, pulls the system more quickly here into this part of Ontario and eventually into Quebec. And if you just kind of look at it, the differences in the snow swath, while they may seem subtle, they're going to be substantial for certain regions. Now, just please understand the 3 separate waves that are going to produce this. One is right now in northern Canada. The other one is hanging out in the Gulf of Alaska. And the third one's a cutoff off the coast of California. We haven't even resolved any of these yet with weather balloons or anything. So we think about all of that, understanding that this is going to change. What I'm really not liking is the fact that the models are bringing in quite a bit of ice. So this is showing through that system where we could possibly see ice accumulations from Oklahoma to Michigan and everywhere in between. And I do not want to see an ice storm hit this area. But back to that snow idea, this is the probability of getting at least 3 inches of snow through next Saturday. And we can see that, of course, the big nor'easter put the heavy snows down here. Still got quite a bit of lake effect snow. The weekend system that's going to bring better precip into the Pacific Northwest is there. But there's still a tremendous amount of spread in the models trying to figure out where that heavy snow swath is going to be from the system midweek to late week next week. Now, beyond that, this is where we end up going. The upper level height pattern on day 10 has already swept these troughs out and brought back in that ridge we don't want to see. And it just stays there, day 10, 11, 12, 13. I'm just playing this out. In fact, the European model just wants to reinforce this by February 10th and drop a broader trough across the east. Now, that is echoed in the GFS, but it's a little bit different. And the differences are actually in the position of this downstream trough. European kicks it out, brings in a much broader ridge, and the end result is going to show up in the temperatures, not necessarily in the precipitation. The precipitation field from the GFS first is just drier across much of the country. The European, drier across much of the country. There's a lot of agreement between these two things, but no agreement in the longer range temperature, and that's where we're going to finish. First, short range temperature with these next 2 systems. I already saw Thursday's high, so let's get to Friday. There's that next shot of cold air that's feeding the high pressure on the backside of this as the system rolls up the east coast. Really cold air coming into place here. Now look what's right behind it. Mild, very mild conditions on Saturday. That spreads east on Sunday, getting into Monday. On Monday, we get some cooler conditions here in the Pacific Northwest when that system rolls through, but very mild in the middle part of the country. On Tuesday, here's the beginning of the next Arctic shot. And all of this is warm sector opening up, receiving that moisture that's going to use to produce that system. And you can already see that by Wednesday, we're back into the single digits for highs in the northern plains and upper Midwest. And this is the next shot of Arctic air that's going to come through. And both models agree on that one. Day 5 through 10, you can see it in through here. Temperatures could be up to 20 degrees colder than average. That's the GFS. Europeans got the same thing. Got a lot of cold air that's coming into this area, day 5 through 10. Where they split is after day 10, because the GFS is still hung up on that trough being back farther to the west and keeping the colder air on this side of the Rocky Mountains entrenched. The European pushes everything east and opens up a broad area of warmer conditions from the Canadian Prairie all the way down to Texas. That's the difference. And these models have been split on this pattern for the entire week. I'll keep analyzing it. I'll report back to you again on Monday how things shake down. We'll have a much better view of that winter storm in the midsection of the country. We'll also see how much snow we end up getting out of the weekend nor'easter. So thanks for hanging on to a bit of a longer video tonight, and I appreciate giving me some extra time. I was traveling for work today and didn't get into about 9 o'clock tonight, so I just wanted to give you the latest information. Thanks.